This is Christopher Sernaque hosting episode 1 of season 4 of the Current Topics in Science podcast. This podcast will address breaking scientific news in light of the origins debate and host interviews with scientists. This podcast is available on the following platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Video recordings of the podcast will be uploaded to YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Today on Current Topics in Science, we have the honor of hosting Dr. Sarah Buckland. Dr. Buckland obtained her doctoral degree in geography from the University of West Indies. Dr. Buckland is a researcher, a data analyst, a technical project manager, and a nonfiction youth author. Dr. Buckland has received national-level awards from the Scientific Research Council of Jamaica and the Jamaican Cultural Development Commission. Dr. Buckland, a pastor's daughter, has been a Christian who's dedicated her life to Christ Jesus since the age of 8, and she operates her own ministry called Chosen to Glow. Chosen to Glow Ministries was originally Dr. Buckland's personal blog. However, it's been blessed by God to become an organization that specializes in witnessing, education, advocacy, and outreach. Chosen to Glow Ministries serves as a consultant civil society organization in Jamaica's Ministry of Foreign Affairs Interministerial Committee on Human Rights to defend Christian values in national policy decisions. Sarah has also represented her ministry at a United Nations side event and at the European Parliament and the ACPEU Youth Consultations. Sarah's work has also received recognition through the Jamaican Prime Minister's National Youth Award for Excellence in Academics back in 2017. Dr. Buckland at one point had a month-long breakdown back in that same year, and by the grace of God, she was able to overcome this personal trial. She wrote about her experience in her book, Life Repurposed, which can be purchased at a link in the description, the proceeds of which will go to the Destiny Rescue Charity, which is dedicated to rescuing children from human trafficking. More information about Dr. Buckland, her research, and her published works can be found on her website, sarahfayebuckland.com. Dr. Buckland has been working as a freelance writer for both technical papers and articles on Christian living and apologetics, so you can enlist her service as a freelance writer on her website, which again is sarahfayebuckland.com. And now, without further ado, good afternoon, Dr. Buckland. How was your day and how are you doing?
Good afternoon, Christopher. Thank you so much for having me. Thank God, yes, my day has been good. And let me just add Happy New Year to you and your ministry and to all of your listeners as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Buckland. It's a pleasure to have you on. And since this is Current Topics in Science, we're going to quickly look at this week's current topic. The Independent recently put out an article called Everything is Awesome! Macedonian students learn human geography using Legos. The article tells the story of a teacher named Alyssa Plakas who received funding from the American Geographical Society that was she could purchase a map of the world. This map of the world cost around $250 and it was no ordinary map. As evidenced by the title, this map of the world was made using Legos. The article says Plakas received a $300 GeoBoost grant, an initiative that provides AP human geography teachers with the opportunity to design their own activity that will require resources beyond what their school or district can provide. Now, Plakas students have been taking trips around the world, one Lego piece at a time. So what's even more interesting is that Plakas' class is actually very unique in and of itself. The article states, Plakas started the AP Human Geography class about 5 years ago and said Macedonia is the only district in the country to offer the class. While the pegs that comprise the land were easily constructed, the students were asked to research different countries and to create symbols in the ocean area that represented the country's culture. Students created the national flower of countries and placed crosses to represent Christianity. Others represented markings and patterns of indigenous peoples. So, the only AP geography class in the country is now using Legos to teach students. Now, awesome as that is, Dr. Buckland, we need to know, can you please explain to us what exactly is the field of geography, and can you please share your thoughts on this current topic?
Right. So you first asked, what is the field of geography? And to me, that question is very interesting because I think many people have a misunderstanding of the scope of what geography is. For example, when I tell people that I studied geography, more often than not, they have a confused look on their faces trying to figure out what career path I'm qualified for. So some will actually simply just say, oh, you're going to be a teacher. But geography's application is really far wider than just teaching or maps. So in its core, really, if you look at the origin of the word geography, it's actually derived from a Greek word, geographia, meaning earth writing. So just from that definition, you see how wide encompassing it would be. So any place, any environment, any type of description that or written description of the earth can be really termed as geography. So as geographers, most people might already know that we're interested in, finding out more about the environmental elements of the earth, like landscapes and processes, volcanoes, etc. But what many don't know, like what the article mentioned, is that we also study heavily on the human element of the earth. So the article mentioned that we have branches called human geography. We also have political geography, so where we study the impact of policies on populations and their environments. We have economic geography, cultural geography, agriculture, disaster management. There are even geographers who, even study things like sports. So any event that can be mapped or analyzed in relation to something on Earth really intersects with geography. So more as it relates to the article itself, though, I saw the quotes where it says that it's one of the most important classes that a student can take. And, I would agree to an extent with that portion. So why I would agree is because of the type of skills that we really get when you study geography. It's one of the most rounded disciplines that one can choose. And there's actually a lot of demand for persons in geography backgrounds in various job markets today. So let me just give you some examples, right? So number one, it increases your awareness when you study geography. You get aware of many topics that are consequential to us as citizens, but the skills that you become a problem solver, you become a planner, because we do have many debates on several issues in classes when you study geography as it relates to development. And I want to even give you an example in terms of how you have different subject areas and the skill set that you just get in that subject area. I would consider geography like integrated studies. So let me just break it down for you. So we have to learn research and essay writing, statistical analysis, critical thinking skills due to many debates. So it's like you're combining English language skills with math skills, with civics, with philosophy, and technical skills, right? So the only downfall, if I may just say, is that geography often requires a lot of reading and drawing, but it is encouraging, like in that article, to see more people coming up with creative ways to make the subject more interactive and accessible to more students. I will also say one of my points of concern, which I believe we might be talking about later, is that how the subject has really become more secularized. So even in the article at the end, they were referencing religions, right? And it, like most subject areas, critical thinking skills are not taught as much. Like it's not as open as one would lead it to believe. So our readings are often framed by assumptions that assume that there is no absolute right or wrong. So like the article was there speaking that, okay, all religions are basically the same, which they didn't delve as deeply as they needed to be, because they are actually assuming that, well, everyone's perspective is equally valid. And that's one thing that, because we're not on the phone, most of the geographies that we learn are not on the right foundation. It kind of does dilute the power of the subject. But all in all, I believe that geography is one of the most exciting subjects. That's why I specialized in it that far. So, yes.
That sounds truly fascinating, Dr. Buckland. Geography is certainly an interesting field of research, And speaking of which, I don't think we could talk about geography without mentioning National Geographic. On their site, they state that geography is the study of places and the relationship between people and their environments. Geographers explore both the physical properties of Earth's surface and the human society spread across it. Geography seeks to understand where things are found, why they are there, and how they develop and change over time. So, Dr. Buckland, it sounds like geography has a lot to do with human interaction with the environment. And so, how were humans designed to relate to the environment?
All right, so I think really the best way to start as a Christian is looking at Genesis when God created both humans and the environment. So there are really two key words that I believe would best describe our relationship. So the first one is dominion. In Genesis 1, God told Adam and Eve to have dominion over the fish, the birds, and other animals. But the second key concept is stewardship. In Genesis 2, verse 15, we have the words guard and cultivate, which really are used to describe the roles that God gave Adam in tending the garden. So on one hand, God tells us that we should have power over the creation, that's dominion, but we should also not be abusing the power, that we should also tend and keep the environment healthy. But one thing that I've really noticed being in the career and also just in general looking at the media and such, in our society, we tend to go from either one extreme to the other. So some environmentalists take stewardship to the extreme. So where they act like any sense of dominion, any cutting down of trees, any eating animals or anything like that is inappropriate. But then there also tends to be a reaction on the other side that acts like the dominion mandate means no boundaries of preservation or there's no obligation for us to care for the environment. But we really do need to be balanced to know that, yes, God did place us in charge, but we need to, He expects us to use this power for good and not over exploitation, because really both humans and the environment, we are both interdependent.
So it sounds like the Earth was designed from the beginning to be finely tuned for human life. Now, Dr. Buckland, speaking of the beginning, is the Earth of 2022 the Earth that was first created? For instance, there are some creationists and evolutionists who would say that at one point there was something like a supercontinent or one landmass, better known as Pangaea. And so how has the Earth changed over the course of its history?
All right. So, to answer your question about environmental changes, so let me first say it's quite intriguing to me how God's word comes to light, even in a more practical way in the study of geography. So the Bible does talk about times and seasons. And yes, when we study geography, we do see that changes have occurred over history in landscapes and atmospheric composition. But the only difference is that we're taught a timeline that assumes uniformitarianism. That means like everything is gradual, going at the same rate all the time throughout history, but this is unbiblical. So you did mention Pangaea, which, yes, there are multiple lines of evidence that the Earth had one time a single large landmass and one ocean. So some lines of evidence, which you might have heard or may not have heard, is even simple observations looking at the shape of a continent. So if you just open up an atlas and you see how South America fits, it's like it seems to have that shape that would fit directly with Africa. And same with North America and Europe. So it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And also, there is also evidence that colder regions were once tropical, and because there are tropical plants and animals that have been found in areas that could not have normally survived. We also have evidence that large rocks under the continents, which we call plates, are still causing the continents to move away from each other, but on a very, very small scale generally. And even the ocean floor, parts of the ocean floor opens up. But curiously, although most did not know this until around like the 1960s, when he first had this theory of continental drift come about, God already had said in Genesis 1, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place. Never said there are going to be 7 oceans or anything like that. Let the waters be gathered in one place and let the dry land, not lands, appear. And it was so. So while it was only recently observed as evidence that just a few decades ago, the history was already recorded accurately in the Bible. And, just this as an example, it just always excites me to see, wow, this is, what I'm reading in the the Bible, it's written thousands of years ago, and look at this modern science just catching up. So it's always amazing to me, blows me away that, history recorded accurately in the Bible without, having the tools or technology to observe it directly as we do now. These are just some really, moving things in how when I study geography as a Christian and see the Bible just come to life. I think that scientists should actually be the foremost Christians. So
Thank you so much for covering that, Dr. Buckland. So in our last question, we just delved into a little bit about the origins discussion. And so on that note, does geography fit better with creation or evolution? On Khan Academy, it says that biogeography, the study of geographical distribution of organisms, provides information about how and when species may have evolved. The geographic distribution of organisms on Earth follows patterns that are best explained by evolution, in combination with the movement of tectonic plates over geologic time. So, Dr. Buckland, is geography evidence for evolution?
All right. I remember taking a biogeography course during my undergraduate degree, and I had sent my lecturer a long email citing creationist literature. The lecturer identifies as a Christian, so he was very patient with my comments, thankfully. But long story short, all the so-called evidence that is really presented as proof for evolution, they really don't hold water because, okay, for example, some species, when isolated, vary in their appearance over time. So we learn the term gigantism. So on some islands, you'll have some very gigantic tortoises, and they'll say, look here, a new species, and this is evolution. But when we look at it, it's the same kind. The turtle was a turtle. It never changed, and it cannot cross a certain boundary, no matter if it's there 2,000, 3,000 years isolated. So one thing is key in differentiating between observation and interpretation, and also realize when they're switching terms, using evolution which is just speciation, and trying to say that it is macroevolution, right? So I think that, knowing how to distinguish knowing how they're using terms is one of the most important skills I think students need to gain. But in addition to not showing evidence for evolution, I would actually argue that geography is one of the most intriguing subjects that point to intelligent design. So why do I say that? The Earth is really full of examples of intentional design, precision, and purpose. So I actually wrote an article some years ago in Saved magazine, about 2 years ago, about the finely tuned universe. There are many examples of how wisely God made where we live. So when we study geography, we learn about the precision of processes, from the tilt of the Earth being exactly the right tilt down to half a degree, that we need to have our seasons, and no part of the Earth becomes too hot or too cold. Even the location of the Earth itself from the sun, and the distance to the moon to further regulate the heat balance. The tides, if it were a little closer, it would flood some islands completely. If it were farther, we wouldn't have the tides, and the tides are so important in heat balance. Even the position of larger planets like Jupiter, they prevent meteors from crashing into the Earth's atmosphere. The composition of our atmosphere, I could go on and on and on. The composition of the atmosphere has a right balance of gases to sustain life. And, how God made the environment to serve us and to be interdependent is also so amazing. Things that we take for granted, even something as simple as the fact that we breathe out carbon dioxide, the plants need, and the plants require oxygen, respire oxygen, which we need, right? And so all of these things can never be explained by a random chance. It's just not reasonable to explain, these things that's coming together, all of them coming together in the right proportion as from random chance. And that's the basis of what evolution is purported to function and to be like. So I'll just quickly add this as well. Unfortunately, theories about past environments are often taught to us like they're factual. So when I was tutoring, I had a student who described their impression of the subject like this. So they thought that physical geography, which is what we study about the natural world, they thought that that was fact, and that the human geography was theory. And I greatly empathize with the student because that is really how the curriculum is portrayed to us. So we do a lot of debates in human geography where we look at policies and things, but we don't debate in physical geography. We're just fed evidence like the physical geography is settled science. So it's only uniformitarian thought. Only those theories are taught, and it's fed like this is evidence and we know this for sure. But what again I want to encourage anyone listening is who is studying geography, especially, or a similar subject, to do is to really exercise critical thinking skills and don't be afraid to ask questions. So question things like, was this directly observed? What's what you're teaching me? The ice core data where they say that every layer of ice represents 1 year. And so this is 800,000 years worth of temperature data that we have. How do you know that every layer represents a year? Is it reasonable to really think that, or is that an assumption? So are there any assumptions that went into what you're being taught? So find out these things. Is there any other way to interpret what is being seen? So differentiating between observation and interpretation, again, is one of the most important skills I think students need to gain.
Yeah, I really appreciated your answer, Dr. Buckland. So you've shown that geography actually is not evidence for evolution. So then the question's now begged, is this field evidence for the creation model? In Refuting Evolution 2, Dr. Jonathan Sarfati says that geography is mentioned in the Bible. Dr. Sarfati says, Christians should not fall for this false distinction between facts and morality. Christ is the Lord of the universe, and the Bible is accurate on everything it touches on, not just faith and morality, but history, science, and geography also. So Christians should not give up any part of the real world to those with a materialistic agenda, especially when atheists are happy to let their own faith influence their science by promoting evolution. Dr. Buckland, would you say that geography confirms the Bible?
Okay, so this question is one of my favorite areas. So yeah, I actually built a ministry that's dedicated to biblical apologetics called Chosen to Glow Ministries. So certainly, yes, there are many confirmations, but I'll just share three where the Bible has mentioned geographical facts long before they could have been observed or discovered by humans. So one of my favorites is in Job 30, around verse 16, where God says that there are springs on the ocean floor, right? Have you entered the springs of the sea? Have you walked in search of the depths? And Job, the book of Job was actually dated to have been written around 1400 BC, 1400 years plus or minus around before Christ was born, a time when no human being could ever imagine oceanic exploration that we have today, right? But even before, as recently as 1930 AD, little was known about the ocean floor. So it was not until actually 1973, that's over 3,000 years after it was already written in the Bible, that direct observations of springs under the sea were made. And another example that I will give, is one of my favorites again. This is a person who is a world-renowned scientist. His name was Matthew Fontaine Maury, and he specialized in the oceans. He actually wrote the first textbook on modern oceanography, and he used the Bible as a foundation for scientific hypotheses. He made a discovery that really revolutionized both air and ocean travel. So if you love to travel, you have to travel safely. And in these modern times, you need to thank the work of Matthew Maury that he got by looking at the Bible. So Matthew Maury was a devout Christian, and he read Psalm 8, verse 8, and said, Psalm 8, verse 8 says that, have you been at the paths of the seas? Or it mentions the paths of the seas. And by using that Psalm as his hypothesis, the basis of his scientific hypothesis, he has found that there are indeed paths, what we call currents, ocean currents. So in addition to scientific foreknowledge, which, is so amazing, the geographical accuracy of the Bible is overwhelming. So it's overwhelming enough actually to turn skeptics or atheists to believers. So there's this skeptic, as an example, his name is Sir William Ramsay. He saw the geographical locations named in Acts where Paul traveled, and he was determined to try to disprove them, because, these are things you can actually see and try and trace. And if it's wrong, it's wrong, right? So he went to the Middle East as an archaeologist to try to disprove the accuracy of the Bible. But the long and short of it is that as he retraced the account of Paul's journeys, where he went, every single detail was so accurate, with historical record in the Bible being the best preserved, that Sir Ramsay actually turned from an atheist to be a Christian. So, I mean, Christopher, I don't want to use up all your time, but there are so many examples. Both of these examples show the truth. All of these examples, 3 I gave, not 2. Yeah, how absolutely amazing scripture is, right? So far beyond human knowledge of the times. So it could not have originated from human minds. So geographical discovery speaks to the truth of biblical inspiration by far. I mean, there's a whole world to open up to look at geography and how it bolsters your faith.
This is awesome, Dr. Buckland. I actually never knew the story of, his name was Sir Ramses?
Sir William Ramsay, yes.
Sir William
and he has certain different books. He published a book, his findings in a book called St. Paul the Traveler. He actually said that Luke is a historian of the first rank, because, Luke wrote Luke and Acts, where Acts has recorded many of Paul's travels. So, I mean, you can look, I think it's even on Britannica, which is not a Christian encyclopedia. So you can look, you can maybe find those books yourself and see his transformation in how he records. It's so amazing, I'm telling you.
I really loved when you looked at the specific verses, like the one in Job or the one in Psalms. Are there any others that you know off the top of your head, just that, wow, you look at that and you go, I can make this into a geographical hypothesis?
Well, I know others, but they're generally biological. For example, where in Leviticus it says that life of the flesh is in the blood, and up to 1799 with George Washington, it is said that he actually was bled to death because the doctors thought that he had bad blood, right? And yet the Bible had mentioned the life of the flesh is in the blood, and the doctors made the poor president die. And so it was not until the 1800s that they actually found that, yes, you can't bleed someone to cure them. It's not bad blood. So it's just so amazing, because Leviticus is the time of Moses, right? And that's thousands of years, over 3,000 years had elapsed before they found these things out. Yeah, the water cycle was also as alluded to in Ecclesiastes 1, where it says, the wind blows and comes around again. It was thousands of years before we actually could trace it on our own, using our own technology and just observations. And it's just so many things, so many different, the earth hangs on nothing. And the circle of the earth, let me just go to that one, because you have some flat earthers around here. That's a big topic, right? So Isaiah 40 mentions that God sits on the circle of the earth. And also Jesus said in relation to the same thing, when he's speaking about his second coming, he says on one side, he says that night, and the other times he said that day. And so that also alludes to the spherical nature of the earth, that part of the earth will have day, part of the earth will have night at the same time, the very same time. And so people tend to attribute the Greeks, Aristotle, I believe, in the 400s of BC, that he discovered the spherical nature of the earth. But Isaiah was written before Aristotle's time, and so the Bible had it there before. I actually have a tract that has a few of them listed out. If you wanted the link, I will share the link with Mr. Sernaque, and you can see that tract is all free. It's on one of my blogs. So this is like my pastime. I really love doing these things, because it's really just amazing how science and the Bible just go hand in hand. It's like I think it was Newton or one of those scientists said, science is like we thinking God's thoughts after him. So we are really just discovering what God had there before. We're not the ones that are making these. We are just discovering and trying to find out the majesty of the wisdom of God and how He has planned these things, and God revealed it to us. Just so much. Christianity is so deep. And again, I say scientists should be the foremost Christians.
Dr. Buckland, thank you so much for all of that extra stuff. And we're going to put that track in the description on the YouTube platform and the podcast platforms. That way people can get access to it. And we've actually arrived at the final question of the interview. Dominic Stahem, he's a chartered engineer. He's got a paper called Biogeography, where he states, evolutionists claim that the biogeographical distribution of organisms provides strong evidence for evolution. Although studies of biogeography provide strong support for the process of speciation, they do not fit the wider predictions of evolutionary theory and are inconsistent with the ancient Earth geologist model of slow continental drift. The data can be seen to fit the biblical account of recolonization following the Genesis flood, and particularly the hypothesis that the observed patterns arose from global dispersal on natural rafts. So, Dr. Buckland, while it does seem like creationists, they've already published some work on geography or biogeography, what's some new ground, so to speak, that creationists need to cover in geography? In other words, what geographical research do you think that creationists should focus on?
I think there are so many things. So both in human and physical geography. But in terms of physical geography, specifically disaster management or disaster risk studies, I believe there's almost unending potential in harnessing the truth of design to help us to better mitigate and manage disasters. So some disasters such as earthquakes and droughts, they may seem random. And while God, yes, can send these at His will, more often than not, I do believe there is a pattern of fluctuation that these take. So, for example, just like biologists and astronomers have cracked the code of the Fibonacci sequence, and astronomers and the Mandelbrot set, they've used them for further discoveries. But I see the potential of finding out similar mathematical codes in modeling natural disasters like volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, drought predictions, etc. Finding out more of these patterns and, the uses that they would play, they would both serve to bolster the beliefs that origins of the earth could not be a product of random chance, but they would also serve to make more accurate early warning systems that communities can better prepare for disasters beforehand. In terms of human geography, I would suggest, survey research to look at regional trends of belief systems based on your age or sex, because many times there are generational gaps that Christians don't really realize. So this can actually help the creation community to better understand which populations are most and least friendly towards creationism. I think the world is very versed at strategic planning, and we're not as versed in strategic planning in the church. But I think that type of strategy where you actually know how to target which group with your messaging, for example, can go a long way in ministry outreach and even guide content so that, our evangelism can reach its full potential. So I always think of the parable where Jesus says that the people of the world are shrewd, and, God's people are just not thinking shrewdly how to really maximize their talents to build the ministry. We're just generally thinking, separating our job skill sets from our ministry life. And I don't think that is the way God intended. Every ability that God has blessed you with, we have to try and use it and channel it to see how best to serve God. Your life is not separate. You're still a Christian, and you're supposed to be always aiming to serve God in all aspects of our lives.
Amen. Dr. Buckland, thank you very much for your time. It was an absolute joy. And to our listeners, thank you very much for taking the time to learn with us on current topics in science, where scientific discoveries are examined in light of the origins issue. You can find Dr. Buckland's biographical information and her website, sarahfayebuckland.com, in the description below. Remember that for each purchase of the book, Life Repurposed, the proceeds will be donated to the Destiny Rescue Charity. Sarah is offering a 10% discount for those who place an order today by placing the following code in the Google form referral. LRSB-10. Please share and subscribe to the Current Topics in Science podcast. It's available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Thanks again for listening, and remember, the truth saves.